other part. That's it.
That's it. This is for headphones.
Cool, but I just wanted to
The City of Southport Board of Aldermen Special Information Session, February 27th, 2023, is now called to order. Thank you for your attendance. Board, city staff, thank you. Our speakers, thank you today for being here. Citizens, thank you. And those watching virtually, thank you. Our invocation will be by Reverend Alderman Lowe Davis, and this will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for all the blessings that you bestow upon Southport. We ask you today to give us eyes that see, ears that hear, and minds that are capable of understanding and deliberating the best choices for the benefit of this city. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Reverend Davis. The next item will be the ethics statement, which I will read. If any members know of any conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest concerning matters on the agenda, please so state at this time. Any conflicts from the board? No conflicts. All right, thank you. Item D, approval of the agenda. Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, our meeting has two main topics. We have shoreline stabilization, the shoreline improvement project, and then the second main topic will be the wastewater treatment plant, and you see those items listed underneath. So there are 8 items, so really 2 main items, 2 main topics. In terms of our shoreline stabilization, as you know, this began in 2015. There was a committee appointed by Mayor Robert Howard. Tommy Harrelson was chairman of that committee. So this has been something that is important to our city, is important to our state, important to our nation, because we have so many people that come to Southport. And this is something that affects the whole East Coast. So this is, I'm grateful that we're moving forward on this. We have funding for it. We've gotten $5 million through our legislature, which is a huge start. The consultant speaker we have today in terms of the shoreline improvement project is Mr. Chris Creed. He is a civil engineer. He's a graduate of NC State in 1989. My sympathies on the Clemson game. My goodness, no one saw that coming. He has a Master of Civil Engineering, Civil, Coastal, and Oceanographic Engineering from the University of Delaware. He joined Olson Engineering in '92. He is Vice President of Olson Associates. So we look forward to his presentation. And I'll say this about engineers, and you've heard me say this before. You can name 5 actors, but you can't name 5 engineers. Yeah, without engineering, with no highways, no nuclear power, no cell phones, on and on and on. So this is the most underappreciated discipline. So thank you for being here and helping to move our city forward on this. So, Mr. Creed.
Thank you guys again, and board for having me here, and the public. I've been working with the city of Southport since I think about 2018 on this topic. We've had a pretty long break, 2019 to present. Never had this opportunity to have a public workshop at the last time, and so it was a little bit different way to communicate in terms of establishing what the goals of the city are with the shoreline restoration. There wasn't a specific funding source identified at that time. And so a lot of stuff was being discussed in concept. And so it seems that there's money available now, and there will be a more interest in proceeding with something real to improve the shorefront along the city of Southport. There were goals and objectives that were set last time for the city. They were not necessarily vetted in this type of form, and I think this is a great opportunity. So not only will it be information I'm going to provide to you guys, but I will also be looking for guidance from input from the city to help frame the goals and what some of the objectives are and what's important to improving the shoreline here. Lots of competing interests. So this is a high-level topic. I was a little unclear on my time allowed, so I cut a few slides from something I provided earlier late last week, but still it'll be enough information to give you a general idea of how we're thinking about the problem and how we're going to approach it, and some of the concepts that we have discussed previously. In 2019, we took it to the point where a concept had been selected, and we had a pre-application meeting with the resource and regulatory agencies, both at the state side and on the federal side, because it'll require permitting from both. And that meeting was nothing more than an opportunity to explain to the agencies that the city is interested in doing something, and these are the types of things that they were thinking about doing. So it was not a formal application at that time. So, see if I can figure this out and point it in the right direction. Is it not on? Okay. Have I got it turned backwards, maybe? On the side. Oh, hold on. Oh. Yes, I got it. We have more comments about engineers right now, too. So let's see if this works this time. Oh, okay, yeah, so everybody knows where the city of Southport is. That's why you're here. But there's some important things that could dictate how your shoreline behaves. And this graphic is intended to show you generally where Southport is, but an important feature, seaward of your city, is the federal navigation project and the federal navigation channel for the Port of Wilmington, which is indicated by the yellow line, the yellow dashed line. This is a graphic that depicts, and if anyone can't see this, please move around the room and get closer. But this is a depiction of the identified study area and project area as it was identified to us in 2018. And it goes from the Marina Basin up to Bonnets Creek. It was about 4,000 feet in length. And a better depiction of how... Yeah, and so I'll talk about these particular reaches a little later in the presentation. But things to be mindful of for planning shoreline restoration and shoreline improvements along the shoreline is the current state of the shoreline. It's highly eroded. It's going years without any meaningful attention other than revetting the shoreline. And when you harden the shoreline, there are unanticipated or undesired consequences in some of the adjacent areas, but it is the last line of defense. The revetment along the road right out here is a perfect example of the type of armoring that is fairly prevalent along most of the areas, some of us in form of bulkheads. When you do that, you lose all the sand beach, the wave reflection, and just a general lowering of the beach profile and the loss of the sand. So you turn the shoreline in from what might have been a sandy, marshy shoreline at one point to a hard shoreline, and the tide doesn't even go. You don't have any shoreline even at low tide. So it's high erosional stress, and the things that affect this shoreline are storm surge, that you guys are very familiar with, wind waves, which are the waves that are blown across the fetches that we can see out the window. The larger fetches result in bigger waves. But a major contributor and something that needs to be thought about even as we move forward are the ship and boat wake generated along the channel. The Port of Wilmington is currently planning further expansion of the harbor in Wilmington, the port facilities, which will be accompanied by a deepening of the port channel. The reason for the port channel deepening is to support larger and more frequent ship traffic. And so larger ships are going to contribute to and produce larger waves, and those ship waves can have an adverse impact to the shoreline. And that's not just along the Southport shoreline, but the entire lower Cape Fear River. and all of the major ports along the east coast of the U.S. experience the same phenomenon. Sea level rise is also going to be something that's going to be very important, and some of the areas of your city are already experiencing the effects of that, particularly in the lower lying areas at the down by the marina. Sea level rise is occurring naturally, and it has been occurring since the last ice age. And the debate about sea level rise in the future is not, is sea level rising, is what will the rate of sea level rise be in the future? Historically, over the last couple of 100 years, the rate of sea level rise has been about 1 foot per century. And so the question is what will it be over the next century? Will it be that same 1 foot, or will it be 2, 3, or 4, whatever projection you may want to pick? So the scientific debate is, what is the future change going to be, not what has happened historically. So even if it stands with the historical rate, we're still going to see over the next 100 years another foot of sea level rise here. So we already have areas that are flooding, just sometimes sunny day flooding here in the city. To give an example of some of the conditions and how they might predict, or what they're predicting for Southport, above a background erosion rate, various predictions. And some of these numbers are quite large, above where we think it might be in the next 50 years, 30 to 50 years. So to dissect the city of Southport's main shoreline, we took an approach of looking and divided it into subsections. And we divided it into 6 sections from left to right. And I'll actually, if you can hear me, it might be easier for me to think. Well, you can't hear me. I'm going to point. Okay, if I can get this to not zap my eye. Section 1 is the area of the sand beach between the restaurants at the end, the marina, and the rock revetment that we call the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers revetment. And the Army Corps of Engineers did build this large rock wall around the lift station several years ago. It was the last line of defense to protect that piece of critical infrastructure. Then we move into Section 3, which is the area along the hotel and the restaurant with the wooden bulkhead. And so that's a different type of shore protection. Has its own characteristics and its influence on the adjacent areas. Then we transition into another area around the pier and the large revetment right out here. So Section 4 is right outside the window here in our definitions. Then we transition into Sections 5 and 6, and these are where the private development, the private parcels are, where we have the piers and also bulkheads along most of this. But in Section 6, why there's a distinction here, there has been past efforts to put shore stabilizing structures there to retain a marsh, Spartina marsh, in front of those bulkheads. And some of that is founded on, some of the concepts we've used is founded on the example we see here in Section 6. And we have private and public areas all along. They're intermixed. There's public areas in Section 1, but there's also private areas in Section 1, transitioning through here of public and private. And then 5 and 6 is mostly your private areas with a couple of examples of public access along that area. Oops. So this is just drilling down a little bit. Sections 1, 2, and 3 gives you a little better view. I'm probably telling people things they already know, but it's important because of what we plan for. We need to really understand what type of conditions exist along each of these areas and what the goals are. One of the things I think is important to know about is like the sand beach, and that would be public access. Would that be a goal of somebody to be able to walk onto a sand beach and then traverse the shore along shore, take a walk on the beach from north to south? Well, right now that opportunity only exists along a very short reach of the city shoreline. Would it be a goal of the city for this to extend all the way down so you could have longer and connect some of the parks and public areas from north to south or east to west? Just another examples of these, the types of materials, but it's very important. One thing I like to show with this photograph here is the size of rock that is used with the core revetment, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers revetment. Is very large compared to what we see on this revetment out here. The reason, I would argue that the reason the Corps selected this size is a design stone size to compensate for the type of wave forces that would expect it to be seen in this area. And through the storms that you've had recently, you've seen very little change to this revetment, unlike the one along the road right here that experiences change quite frequently. The reason for that, the stones out here are probably too small in size. So then we move on to the section 3 with lots of the wooden bulkheads along the hotel and the restaurant, but we also see evidence of past drainage structures at the base of the wall. So this is another issue that we'll have to deal with when we come up with a permanent solution of the shoreline, is how do we deal with stormwater runoff? But then also, what do we do with this debris? There's potentially some culturally significant items that are located along the shoreline, and presently we have a contract. Our first task order under our agreement is with two things. I'll summarize these later, but I'll go ahead and get to them now. One is update the physical survey to understand what the elevations of the upland and the offshore are, so we can design around that for current conditions. But also, a cultural resource survey is currently underway. That will be needed to support regulatory decisions for whatever plan is implemented moving forward. A lot of these, I've been told that some of these stones that exist are not only just debris that have been cast out there in the past as some form of whimsical shore protection measure, but is also some ship ballast stone and things like that are out here when it was in operation in port. Then we move into the area of section 4 and 5. We can see here where the revetment is. Obviously, the road is a strip of critical infrastructure. At low tide, there is some limited access now, but it's pretty limited in time each day, and it's not super safe to walk along there. It's lots of debris and other things along that area. And then we transition into the private homes over to the right. And just some other examples, you can see, it doesn't take photographs to do that where we're standing, but the stones are much smaller. And so the idea is what would need to be done to make that either a permanent feature, or do we cover that up and not worry about it in the future with some other type of solution? As we move further along the beach to the private areas along section 5, we see evidence of past structures, piers, and other dock facilities that have been out there and destroyed. The existing infrastructure that is there now, and evidence of lots of other debris. A lot of the debris that exists along the shoreline are past failed attempts to stabilize the shoreline. The remains of that material. Then we move into section 6, which I think is very important. And if you are interested in this, is to go to one of the parks on this reach of the shoreline here at low tide and see how it looks at low tide there. There's a small, let me try to fix that again. Oh, well, there's a perfect picture of it. There's a small rock structure that has been placed at the toe of this marsh, and then we have a very healthy Spartina marsh behind this rock structure. Even though this area here is bulkheaded, it is also protected by the wave breaking effects of the rock and also the grass itself. In order for the Spartina marsh to exist, however, you have to reduce the wave energy to give it an opportunity to survive there, and that is what the rock structure is for. There's a wide-scale program in the state of North Carolina now in lots of the southeastern states with green solutions to coastal resiliency and shoreline stabilization. Whoever did this was way ahead of their time, and it's a great example of how it can be successful in doing this. So we're back to our example of we have these different shoreline characteristics. So we may look at solutions that one size doesn't fit all for the entire shoreline. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is just that influences the shoreline. What is the wave field like that is generated along this reach of shoreline? Wilmington Harbor is less than the ship channel is less than 1,000 feet away. And even if you look at some of the larger boats that go by here on a daily basis, you can see that they produce waves that do influence the shoreline. Ship waves are likely the most impactful ship-generated, boat-generated wave that reaches the shoreline. But obviously with the presence of the Wilmington Harbor Channel as well as the Intercoastal Waterway, there's a lot of boats going around this area. And so there's a lot of boat-generated waves. So the project goals, and some of this is from last time. All this is subject to additional conversation, and so we can talk about it more. Obviously, comprehensive shore protection and stabilization is key. How do we protect ourselves from these coastal storm events and from all these environmental factors that exist out there? But how do we do that and also provide some other types of opportunities that we might want to have. We want to protect the shoreline and the upland from that erosion. We don't want any more loss of land. Ship-generated waves is a big key design feature, not only presently, but also what would that look like in the future? And there has already been work done by the state and the state ports to help identify what some of those future forces will be along the shorelines of the lower Cape Fear River. And how tolerant will you be to future sea level rise, and what will be your goals in that, and trying to compensate for what those expectations might be? And do you live with it, or do you try to respond to it? The environmental resources of the area, principally the marsh areas are considered environmental resources, but they also provide shore protection benefits. And recreational value has always been, a key component to the goals of the city, to our understanding. And how do we integrate that into a shore protection approach? And I really like the idea of expanding these living shoreline features that already exist along portions of your shorefront. Another issue is how do you deal, not really goals, but really criteria to evaluate would be how do you deal with public and private ownership along the shoreline. So our approach is going to be to develop the project scope for current conditions. We're working with what we have out here. And then we would integrate any future sea level rise considerations in there, with raising certain features and also compensating, having comments from others, your watershed management consultants about how we might be able to integrate some of the drainage issues into a plan. We're looking at what are your funding constraints. Your constraints for doing this would be what's your tolerance for green or gray solutions? Green are the grasses, gray are your revetments, and is there something in between? And how much does all this cost within your current or potentially future funding opportunities? And do you phase it? Do you prioritize particular areas and implement a project or phase one of the project with your current funding opportunity, and then show progress with that, and opens you up possibly for future grant opportunities as well from the state and others. And then we were working with the existing shoreline features, particularly the Corps of Engineers revetment. How do we integrate that, and how can we use it to our benefit as well as the living shoreline? So things we've talked about in the past, and how we've integrated all of these. The no action is always everything from an engineering perspective. When you look at the no action, if we don't do anything, what's going to happen? And so it kind of gives you a basis for making decisions. If you don't like what's going to happen, then we're going to spend money to meet some level of objective. T-groins are features that, I'll start at the bottom. We'll start at the bottom since we've already, and we know what a revetment is. The revetment are the rock areas that we already have at the Corps of Engineers revetment and along the highway right here along the street. So one opportunity would be is just revet the entire shoreline and call it a day. But then you basically eliminate any access to the shoreline again. But you are protected, and you can build a big, robust revetment, and the shore protection matter is addressed. But if we want to integrate some sea and beach opportunities in there, it would be, we just can't simply place sand. We see, if anyone's familiar with Bald Head or Oak Island or some of the other areas where they do beach renourishment, that is not really an opportunity that is available for this reach of shoreline because of the forces that exist along the shoreline, principally the ship and boat waves. If you put sand out there, it's very unlikely it would stay for very long. So if we want to place sand out there, we have to stabilize it. And we stabilize it with either T-groins or breakwaters. And these types of structures, which we could zoom in on this, I'm going to walk away from this for a second and point. To put things, so everybody understands what I'm talking about, a breakwater is a shore parallel structure that is not directly attached to the shoreline. A T-groin has a breakwater head, so it has a shore parallel piece to it, but it also has a shore perpendicular piece, the stem, and that's intended to control the alongshore movement of sand. So here's an option that was evaluated last time we did this, And it has several features in this particular, for this example. It has the gray, the green, the existing rock revetment, and I'm going to step away again. So we have the existing rock revetment, the small rock structure with the grass that's already behind it here. We intended to expand the concept of that further. Every time I touch it, it also moves. So we would expand this concept to some point to be determined later, but we didn't like this idea, so we would add additional small structures here with granite or other type of stone. But then we would transition into a sand beach. And in this particular concept, which was called option 1 at the time, our goal was to provide a sand beach along the entire from the eastern end of the road all the way over to the western end and tie in to the existing sand beach. But to do that, because it's very deep out here, and the fact that we have a lot of wave energy here, we would need to stabilize the sand with these structures. And it's a pretty aggressive set of structures, so we would have these rock structures here with the sand behind it. And that would be imported sand from an upland or other beach-compatible sand source. You don't want muddy sand on your beach. You want nice, clean sand. So it would be a sand source of that type of nature. But then we looked at things like the full revetment. So this was the range of opportunities we looked at. I didn't put the whole list in here for this opportunity. I kind of regret that now. But there's ranges of this, and one of the other options that we looked at, I think was pretty popular last time, was to remove some of these structures and not have a continuous sand reach along this area, but improve the areas on either side of the wooden bulkhead and revet an area here. So you can go through a host of variations on the theme based upon project goals and also available funding. And so that's where we stand now. We have these past options. We're 4 years from where we started, or we left off last time. So there have been lots of changes. You've had several hurricanes that have been super impactful since we were here last. So we're currently updating the, and we can talk about, I'll get to what we're doing in a minute, but let me finish the description. These are the types, if you drill down in here, these are the type, what the structures in sand fill looks like in cross-section. This being a revetment where there's no beach or anything. This being one of the T-groins where we've got a breakwater head and a stem with some sand fill. This is a breakwater offshore with the sand fill behind it. This is simply sand fill with nothing. This is between structures. And this is what it would look like for this part kind of marsh with a much smaller rock structure, a little bit of fill behind it, and grass planted on top of that. So those are the kind of describes it in sections what those structures look like. So where we are, and I'll go to that, current activities is, and then we'll talk about where we want to go with this. We're updating the topographic and hydrographic survey right now. That is, we're trying to get an update of what the water depths look like offshore. Has there been additional scour? Has there been additional sand loss? Which will ultimately increase the quantity of material required to build whatever option is picked. We have the Cultural Resource Survey and Investigation. Dr. Gordon Watts from Little Washington is the principal investigator for that study. And then we'll be developing, once we go back to the previous slide here, once we go through this plan selection, then we will be getting into the next step. Well, the next steps are really working toward a preferred approach and confirmation. I say preferred approach confirmation because we already have 6 options. Are those still, one of those options still something that the city would like to consider? We will go through the process of updating quantities, updating projected costs with those, and help guide some decision making and ultimately reaching the goal of that. We'll do schematic level design, then jump into the permitting. And the way you get through this whole process is you do your schematic level design and jump into the regulatory portion, and you're successful who will likely be a marine contractor capable of working from land and the water side, so there'll be some barges involved. Right now, we're projecting if we were to get on track with a permit application this year, our environmental consultants from Land Management Group are suggesting, given the complexities of this type of project, it will take about 2 years to permit it, to go through that process. And then there will likely be some post-construction reporting and monitoring following that. So things that we're going to need to consider, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is my list. You guys might want to add other things to it. I am very concerned about how deep it has gotten offshore from these storms since we were last here. What is that going to do to our ability to propose these structures? Has it gotten so deep that it's not feasible to do that now? That's a question that I have. Available funding, is that enough for the reaches shoreline you might want to address? And it might only be available for phase 1 if we decide to go down that path, enough to do that. Riparian ownership, I understand there are some issues in the state of North Carolina with shoreline improvements where you have private property and how that might influence future riparian ownerships of those private upland individuals. And that will need to be vetted with the community to ensure that any rights that you don't want to lose are not lost. Obviously, cultural resources, and we have touched on that already, and future sea level rise are, I think, are pretty important considerations. So where I'll be next and what we will provide once we get these surveys completed is going into this next phase of design evaluation, reevaluation, the permit required surveys. And when I say these surveys, they're going to be the environmental surveys because there's fish habitat and there's benthic habitat out here that will also have to be characterized and considered in any plan that is implemented, as well as the Spartina marshes. We will need to revisit you as a group and decide which path you want to take and how you want to proceed before we go to the resource agencies and have another meeting with them to present our proposed approach with them. And the better prepared we are for that meeting, the better. Submit the permit application, and then we would go through the process of working toward regulatory review and approval. And in fact, the last part, the regulatory review and approval, that is really the biggest step of getting through this process, so that going to design and construction, it falls back into the engineer's lap at that point, and it's pretty straightforward to navigate. So that is the extent of my comments, given where we are right now. So I'm available for questions.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone on the board have any questions? Alderman Allen? Alderman Ald?
I do, sir. So I'm not sure if you've seen this in the document or not. The original document that was done finished maybe in 2018, had the money coming to us for storm protection, I believe. And as we now know, it's storm and wave protection. Do we know if the grant has been changed to allow for the state money to be used for the wave action?
Well, it's a shoreline improvement grant. It gives you the opportunity to improve your shoreline. Now, the basis for how the money was assigned to you, if it was anticipation that the future port activities might have an influence on that, I'm not sure if any of that went into the decision making or not. But we will be designing for shore protection under the existing conditions that exist for your shoreline, whether it's wind waves, storm waves, or ship waves.
Okay.
The approach will be the same.
There was a fair amount of discussion in the recent past about if we put it in and we don't include the two things, both impacts, that we might have to pay some of the money back. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer on this. I'm not smart enough about this. I just want to make sure whatever we do it correctly.
Understood.
I bring it up for discussion point. You talked about the impact of the storms on the depth of the water out here, and that thing out there is making this channel wider and deeper right now, which I assume will impact that dredge out there.
Yeah, the dredge, yeah. Right.
Because they're going to make that so they can be when you watch the 1,200 footers come in, it's very tough to make that starboard turn
Right.
to go
Right.
upriver. So I'm assuming you're going to include that in your mathematics.
Yeah, so we will look at what the anticipated ship and the size of the ships that are projected. The Corps has a model for what they have a design ship that they're working around as the big one, the Maersk, Susan Maersk or something like that.
Yep.
And so most of the ports on the East Coast are designing around that ship. So we will look at, hey, if that ship's moving at a certain speed, what type of wave are we expected to produce along this reach of shoreline? And we will consider that. And it's going to affect principally, particularly when it's going to affect the size of the stone and the size of the structures that you're using to stabilize, because those have to be stable under all the conditions or it doesn't work. So we'll need to make sure that, that could be your design wave. And we would definitely look at that, absolutely.
Going forward, we've had the luxury of a gazillion dollars being pumped into the system for grants and loans and stuff, and that's going to start slowing down as we go forward here. On the process, the timeline that we're talking about, assuming that it's going to be more than $5 million that we have in the bank, and I would assume it would be, we're going to have to be able to identify that cost of the project well in advance of the actual construction of the project in order to meet any realistic timelines. So I just throw that out, because in the past we could sashay into Raleigh and ask for $5 million, and they gave us $5 million. But going forward, that's going to be harder and harder to do. Right. So our costs have to be pretty precise along with the program before. And I don't know how you do that before the bidding. Do you wait till the bids are open and then you start to do it? That's going to drag the whole thing back, because you're going to be a whole another calendar year away after you do. If you waited for the bid to open, and the bids, I assume they want to act sooner than a year away. So I throw that out as conversation that we need to move forward and think about our timeline. About that. Am I making sense about that?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I'll comment on that. So the survey that I'm speaking about, that is one goal of that survey, so we understand the conditions, we superimpose a design on those existing elevations in the water and on the land so that we can get a better idea, update the quantity estimate. So you first have to have the quantities. How much rock would it take? How much sand would it take? How much whatever else you're using it would take to build that. Then you start assigning costs to those types of materials and the cost to mobilize dredges, mobilize equipment. And then the step two, when we start doing opinion of probable cost to construct, we don't like to do cost estimates because it's just an opinion. That typically is based off current market conditions. We look at other types of similar activity in the area and what those types of activities are costing, and then apply those costs to your project so that we can give you guidance. Then we apply contingencies to that as well to get you and the purpose of that is to help you make decisions. Is this reasonable? Do we have enough money to get close to this? And so, yes, that is all going to be part of our task to help guide your decision.
And that's during this first year, you're doing a lot of that right now, or will be doing that.
We will be doing that, absolutely.
All right, that's excellent. I'm going to jump to your chart that says sections 1 through 5,
Okay.
1 through 6.
Let's see if I can navigate this back to that. I think I can. Yep.
There you go.
That one.
So I understand sections 1 through 4, but 5 and 6 is almost exclusively private property. There's no immediate attachment to city property.
Right. So I'll comment on that a little bit. So we last time we were here, we did an ownership mapping of the entire shorefront. So we do have those documents, probably also in the property appraisers database somewhere of who owns what in this portion.
Do we have a
There
database?
are some public parcels also in section 1. So these are of concern with respect to these riparian issues as well as like here. But I do understand, yes, I also understand there are a public access point in section 5 that allows
Because it's like 40% of the project.
Right.
If I'm ballparking here.
It is, but I would submit that most of the cost is right here, because if you go back to that alternative I showed you, the heavy work, the sand and the larger structures are really focused in sections 1 through 4. What is currently proposed in sections 5 and 6 is pretty minor in terms of scope as well as cost. But there was a conversation last time about public-private participation in this project. And it was never a consensus reached to my knowledge, but it was something that was discussed also at that time.
And I'm certainly in favor, if we can work something like that out, as a partnership between the landowner. But when you're getting up to number 5, there's, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's 2 access points, but I know there's one. It's been broken for years. You can't get down there because the steps are broken. So it's not like it's a daily use thing. So based on the dollar amount, how much do we spend for a ramp or for a staircase that nobody uses to bolster private property is the real nut that needs to be broken here, because there's no immediate touching. If you go further down towards American Fish, to your left, sir, on that diagram, I think a case can be made that even though there's slivers of private property that goes across the street and all the way down to the water, I believe. At least it goes to the grassland, and then the beach is open to everybody. That protecting that walkway to the yacht basin is for the good of the city. But when you get up to the other end, I'm not sure what we're protecting for the residents of the city other than somebody's personal home. Especially in 6, because there's signs for those people that says, get off, don't come down my street.
Right.
That's a fact of life. There's a sign there that says, don't come down my street, private property. So how do we justify that money? And that's a political.
That's not my decision.
And I should have finished that sentence. And that's a political
It is.
decision and not an engineering decision. But I bring that out because we need to be upfront about this. I do not want to get caught by the state saying we're not going to give you any more money because you're doing private property with this stuff. I don't know how you pick these people to be winners and losers. I don't care how you pick winners and losers. But I don't want to. We're going to need more than $5 million,
Right.
and I don't want to burn that bridge over something that is not going to impact the residents directly.
Right. So look, if we could look at it in terms of that concern. We approached the problem from an engineering perspective when we were asked, hey, shoreline improvements from here to here. We never got to the point.
Well, the shoreline goes all the way down to the landing.
Right.
Our shoreline for Southport goes all the way down River Drive and all the way down to the landing. So if we're going to use that kind of a discussion, we missed 2/3 of the road.
Well, and that would be some guidance I would need back from you guys, is for you to tell me where are the stop and end point, and the beginning and end, and what you want me to look at. This was what it was last time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we came up with, an engineering solution from here to here. There was the political piece never got there, but in this particular approach, you could very easily not do this, even though this is a plan that's been presented in concept.
Mm-hmm.
You may guide us, like, we want you to get a permit on this, and we're not worried about that. And then if they want to do that themselves, maybe they choose to do that at the time. But that would be, that's just an example that you could give me. We're only interested in here to here, or, Sorry, I shouldn't have ever touched it.
And again,
back to the phasing comment.
again, there is opportunity here for discussion that if they need more rock there, and we're bringing rock in, and we got to pay for the barge to get here anyways, that they could pay the guy to offload the rock and stack it the way it should be stacked, and we happen to pay the shipping cost because it had to get here anyway. Our rock had to get here. And there's opportunities for that, but I really question the last two to see how much benefit it is to public property as opposed to private property.
So that would be a decision you have to make.
Right.
So the question with what Olson will be doing, though, is where do you want us to, in the services we're providing to the city, what section of shoreline do you want us to focus on? Do you want us to include concepts for that area that they may want to consider on their own, or you just want us to completely ignore it? You don't have to answer this question today, but that would be something that we would be looking for guidance from, you guys.
And given the fact that it's going to be 2 years of permitting and all of that stuff, and we're working to figure out how to get more money other than the, I guess, $4.5 million we'll have left over. If we were to, in today's dollars, if we were to say, let's move forward, we got the permits, let's move forward now, we haven't got any additional funding, what would $4.5 million get us? Do you have any idea?
And today, no, I don't know that today.
Okay.
Because like you exactly say, in today's dollars, the market has changed so much in the last 18 months. I'm really concerned about what that's going to look like when we put pen to paper.
That's, as we learned from the next discussion coming up at 4 o'clock, you know, we're like $27 million short.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's happening to a lot of people right now.
Thank you. When I first got elected, I grabbed this right away. And I looked at this and I said, this is really well done. I had no idea what the cost was going to be. I immediately, you know, zeroed in on the private property, but I took that off my mind for a while and just looked at the other part. And I have to compliment you that this was a well thought through process.
I think it has a high chance. Thank you. I think it has a high chance of success if conditions are such that we can build it within the funding available. And I think it gives a nice opportunity to have more access to the water's edge, being a waterfront community. And we've built these types of projects all over the world. So it would be another great example of that if we're successful in getting there. Thank you,
sir.
I've got a
Alderman
couple
Davis.
of questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, what, did I interrupt you? No, okay. We're out politing each other here. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Creed. First of all, yeah, when I went through the packet, I was thinking, boy, I'd really like to know who your graphic artist is. Can you said you're not prepared to answer some of this today, and it's up for us to have, be thinking about the answers later. I would like to know, not today, but later, before we make a final decision, are there any negative impacts to what we're trying to do further down if we leave out the part that's in front of private property? You were talking about how, you know, a hard surface creates other unwanted consequences. If we left that alone, what would happen to that property? And also, if we left it alone, what would that property, what erosion there do to us? Would it shift some erosion toward the rest of the
Yeah, so
shoreline?
that's a pretty common question and something to be concerned about. It is a bigger problem when you're on the open coast like the beach. If you put a structure, you will rob Peter to pay Paul. You could have accretion in one area and erosion in the other. When we do these, there's nice along this reach of shoreline. There's nice hard start and stop points. We have, you know, the marina here, and I'll get back to that in a second. But we also have the creek at the far end. And for the most part, sand travels, or the erosional forces go from right to left in this graphic. So as evidenced by a lot of shoaling that occurs in the marina right here. And so one thing about putting this unconstrained sand along this beach is very likely that a lot of it will just get swept off and go over here. So, but not to get too deep into the design, your concern is addressed in the fact that these are breakwaters here and not these T structures, because this allows sand to move freely back and forth and minimizes the effect that you're concerned about. If we were to not build this, I would not anticipate that the things we were doing here would have a significant impact because of the way the forces typically work along this reach of shoreline.
Okay, next question. If you could reverse back one more.
Slide.
Yes, please.
Okay. This guy?
Keep going.
Okay?
It's the map that shows, there we go. No,
okay.
not that one either.
Okay. The map with
Actually, I can just
the
describe
six
it.
sections?
Yes.
Okay, let's
thank
go
you.
back there. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, and I had like four versions of this in my original presentation, so I wouldn't have to do this, but here we go.
All right. It appears to me that each of those elements is facing the river. What about the yacht basin itself? As you come around the edge, the very pointy edge, I believe that's called a cape, we have that shoreline and extending all the way back, and there are multiple problems in the yacht basin. Erosion, and possibly consequences of stabilization along the riverside. We have all kinds of silt built up in there, and we're going to have to start considering drainage. I'm
Right,
sorry, dredging. So what are your proposals, if anything, for along the yacht basin shoreline?
We have not looked at that. Was never part of the objective. Our objective was always the Cape Fear River shoreline. This is a very different problem. This is more of a marina problem because we don't have the big waves. We don't have none of these other influences. This is more of a typical bulkhead where you're having a big vertical bulkhead, so you can have boat access to deep water right along the bulkhead. So it's very, very different. I understand the siltation. I understand the siltation problem, it is a concern. The agencies even raised that with us when we met with them. But presently, our goal was like, don't exacerbate this problem. It was kind of an objective that we had when we did this last time. But fixing this problem was not part of in our scope.
Disclosure, I live on the yacht basin, and I can tell you.
We'll be happy to talk to you about that too, but that's not what we've done in the past.
Well, but there really is significant wave action in there, and tremendous amount of erosion, and the erosion is very fast. And unfortunately, there's a road that goes very, very close to the edge, and that's in danger of eventual erosion and undermining. I have one more question, and this is for the rest of the board. Are we going to allow the public to ask questions? Yes. Good, good.
Mr. Lombardi. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So, since we're at the yacht basin, whatever you will be designing will not have a negative impact. We understand we've got a dredge problem that we're working on now with the yacht basin, but whatever this along the Cape Fear is not going to exacerbate it.
That is the goal.
That would
That's
be
correct. Right.
part of the design conversation.
We are concerned with that. Right?
Yeah, good. And then we talked about when the beach rebuilds, and some of these questions I already mentioned, but I just want to get them out. When the beach rebuilds, does that become private property? And you said no.
I would tell you, on the ocean front, it is not.
Right.
The interior areas could have different laws, and I would seek counsel
Okay,
on that.
so we need legal, just to make sure
yes.
what we're doing
Yes.
Is what it is. And that may play into some of what Rich was saying. I would also ask that consideration. I appreciate that Rich, you may never have walked in the Atlantic Avenue Park and gone down to the beach and all that. I don't know if just because I live in that area, I can tell you it does get used that way in low tide situations. So it does, and it is a public park. So I would like to see that remain. We got a grant, and Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, but several years ago we got a CAMA access grant, and that is actually a CAMA access point for the city, which means it's an water access. Now, I don't disagree that it is in need of some help, but I would like to maintain.
I think an argument certainly can be made all the way down to Kensington Park. I hope that's the right park.
Kensington's down at the other end.
That all the way down to Kensington Park might be a good spot. as long as we can get over the hump that the state is going to be okay with that. After you get past Kensington, it is strictly private property.
No, I'm talking Atlantic Avenue
I know where
right
you- yeah.
then. Yeah, that, and basically, it's just a little bit of where you were talking about living shoreline. We would want to have it so that we could have beach access there.
You mentioned that you would like, right, to reduce the scope of that green area so that, yeah, understood.
And then I was going to get into some of the other options that were originally part of it, but we don't really need to talk about that now because you've got to get all your survey work before you really know. This is old information.
Right, so my
Yeah.
goal would be to update these based upon some feedback I'm getting from you today, is get our new information, update these concepts, quantities also, and so we could come back and debate the pros and cons and maybe refine it down to a selected plan would be, I think, the next logical step to get feedback from you guys.
The other thing I would say is that, and I know you're aware of the current study to dredge to 47 feet as opposed to the current 42 feet, and what impacts that will have on our shoreline since it's so very close to us, the channel is. So in factoring in, assuming at some point they get to do whatever, I don't know, but we would have to model for that, I would guess.
They have, and we can, we will we can do one of two things. We can do a peer review of what they presented because there are results. They've already identified areas along the river all the way to Wilmington where they expect to have, where the effects of this is going to be. And one of them is along the Southport shoreline. So we've had access to those reports in the past. I'm not sure where they are in terms of the public domain right now, but we can definitely seek that out and investigate that further, which is a reasonable thing to do, which is why I've highlighted it in the presentation. And principally, that's going to be, hey, if what you're doing, will it fail if we change, if those conditions change? Yeah.
And then if we build up and we have this shore, this sandy shore, will that help make us more resilient for sea level rise? Will that give us any,
Well,
since we're building up land?
You already have a lot of high elevations here. So really, the area that's most concerning for future sea level rise is going to be this lower area where you already experience a lot of flooding. That's just going to get worse. When you start getting to this area, it's already pretty high. What we are going to be concerned with sea level rise, if we start building structures, how high do they need to be so they remain effective as the water levels go up, but not so high that they're aesthetically undesirable. So, but there are some things with berm elevations that you can do, but you can also have an adverse impact to drainage here. So this is something that has to really be considered. And if you build something higher here, it doesn't mean the water's not going to go around the backside. So I think this is more of a regional resiliency problem as opposed to a shore stabilization problem on the shorefront. It's like, how do you address this problem in the whole footprint of the area versus just one side of it? Right now, that this work would not address that topic.
Yeah, I think that's it for me for the now.
Mr. Mayor, how do we proceed from here?
If you let me go with the next step. Now is time for our public to ask questions. We won't make any motions or anything. This is a workshop, so we don't do any voting or anything. It's information only. Anyone from the public that would like to ask questions, please come up to the microphone and ask your question. Anyone? Yes, sir, please.
Okay. Here, you come here. Use this one right here.
Am I misremembering? But I thought it was in 2014 or 2015, we all stood out here and had big butcher paper and we put all the things down that we wanted to happen. And we were talking about shoreline stabilization at that point. And then there was a study that was done. And if my recollection serves me, it said in the study that the ship traffic did not adversely impact the shoreline. And I thought that was just absolutely crazy. Because we're talking about Ballhead Island Ferry, and it was said in the study, and I don't have it, but that was not impactful. Does anybody recall that? Yes, sir.
I was on the committee.
And?
Much to the chagrin of some of the members of the committee, it's not the Bald Head Ferry. It's not the shipping traffic. There's a 5-mile stretch of open water from this point all the way up to where the ferry lands up by Pure Beach. And when you get a hard storm that comes through, and you get the wind coming out of the east, northeast, north, it tears this apart. All you have to do is go to down by the landing and walk that beach after a bad storm. It's totally destroyed. 5, 6 feet taken away in one night. 12 hours, it's gone. It's not the Bald Head Ferry. It's not the shipping lane.
Okay. All right, I'll buy that. Thank you. I have a question. If you're going to do your shoreline, right over here is where I launch a boat, a kayak, on the shoreline, next to the yoga dock. What am I going to encounter if we get our dream shoreline here? What am I going to encounter when I try to launch from that same location?
Sir, if you could speak from the microphone so they could, both of you, so they could hear.
He was asking me how would in section 1, where the 2 breakwaters are, what would the expectations be after the project is built? It's a sand fill, so instead of having a wide open beach, you are now going to have a sand beach with 2 rock structures out there, and there will be gaps between these structures.
That's, okay.
Yep, so you just go through the gap.
Similar to what Bald Head Island has.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I
Yep.
got it.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, we built those structures too.
So how wide would the space be between the
It's typically that's about 150 to 200 feet. And those gaps right there, so it's pretty wide. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that's why we point out all the different waves that affect the shoreline. They all have some effect to it. Some affect it more than others, and so. But you're designing for a design wave. Really, the shape that we would put these structures in, it doesn't really matter what type of wave affects it. It has an influence on the wave breaking, and really what you're doing with these structures and these breakwaters, these types of things, is you're reducing the amount of wave energy that can reach the beach. So you're only making small gaps, which reduces the amount of wave energy that gets there. The rest of it is either breaks on the rocks or is reflected. And so it just gives you it gives your beach an opportunity to exist. Anything else?
Any other questions from the public? Please, if you would go up to the microphone.
And full disclosure, I'm a general contractor, and I've worked with Olson's before. So one of my questions, as far as the private area down here from Atlantic Street all the way to Kingsley Park, is the permitting process. So I think it is very important just to note and to say that while we're getting permitting done, let's allow those private owners to contribute or do a partnership like we were talking about to get that waiver betterment done. Because if you do go look at the living shoreline that was placed in front of Kingsley Park, it is working and it is beautiful, and everybody needs to go down there and take a look. But when it comes to the permitting, to do a joint permitting process with every private owner that wants to engage in the living shoreline in front of their house, but it is going to take also some rewording, because I think the last time that the owners were approached, they were going to have to relinquish or give up their riparian rights in order to be involved in the living shoreline. So that's just something that I wanted to mention so that the board was aware too, that relationship's going to be important for them to get their permitting, because we would love to see, or I would as a Atlantic Street resident, I would love to see that continue through without gaps, because I know, having installed a seal or a living shoreline in the past, if the right or the left of the seal is open, especially coming down the river from that open stretch of water there, then it will scarp behind it. But anything as far as, a seal is defined 30 feet, out from mean high water. So it does build beach, and it does just provide a really beautiful area, and we've got great examples of that. So I think the general public needs to go look and see what we're up against, but that permitting process probably needs to heavily engage the private owners so that we can, continue the shoreline on down. That's all.
Those are very good points. Yeah, so as a follow-up to that, I think my recommendation would be, with respect to an update of what we've done in the past, is to not reinvent the wheel too much, make modifications to it, and give you opportunities to make those types of decisions down the road. From an engineering perspective, we can still look at this reach of shoreline here. The political and economic decision still stands in front of you on what you do with that. Even from a regulatory side, you can decide, hey, we can pursue this permit on your behalf. Whether or not the private owners produce the money to pursue this is still up in the air, and you can work on that in parallel to the regulatory process. Getting the permits is a big deal. It's very time consuming. We also thought that having the living shoreline, the green area involved, would be an enticement to the regulators to see this as a comprehensive and somewhat has a green component to it to make it favorable to them. And so, but there is no commitment if you get a permit to build anything. You just can't build bigger than you've permitted. You can always build less. And so, unless there's some undesired impact from not building the whole thing. So, from an engineering perspective, and that first step of updating project scopes, we can make modifications based upon our conversation, and then present it back to you, and then we can drill down to phases, the overall project scope, phases, and how we might want to approach it from a regulatory standpoint. That would be my recommendation. It's pretty simple to do, given where we are right now, as opposed to making those really hard decisions right now of yes and no on particular areas.
Okay, any other questions? To basically, do you have any more? To basically sum up, at least from my point of view, you have these 6 sections. Each one is unique. The biggest, just from listening, it is the wave energy. How do you mitigate the wave energy on our coast? Is that right, sir? How to mitigate that? Because that's the biggest issue. As you said, Mr. Swenson, the storms and that type thing, just this wave energy is powerful. And each is unique. So from an engineering standpoint, what is the best practice for each unique section that will do that? And so if you bring that back to us, and whatever it costs, that's what it costs. We need to do this. We need to continue funding. And I think we need to look at it as a whole parcel, the whole 4,000, and make a solution for that, and then do the public-private or whatever. I mean, we wouldn't provide sewer for part of the city and not for the other. I mean, so we really need to look at this as I think a holistic point of view, the whole area. So anyway, this was a very eloquent presentation. Thank you so much, Mr. Creed, for that. And,
Thank you all for having me.
We look forward to further discussion, so thank you. Our next topic is the wastewater treatment plant. And I would, before I introduce the engineers and that type of thing, I'd like to call on our city manager, Bonnie Therian for some remarks before we get started.
Thank you all for coming today. I know the board and I appreciate it very much. Just so you understand, this is not discussing the financing end of the expansion of the sewer plant. That meeting is called for Wednesday of this week at 9 a.m. at Indian Trail. Right? Did I get the right building? Because we're so confused. We have so many meetings this week. So you wouldn't ask the engineers questions about that because that's not their thing. So I just wanted to make sure everybody realized that. But certainly we will live stream the meeting on Wednesday. So if you cannot be there, the board's going to be meeting with our financial advisor, First Tryon, in order to look at some options of how we're going to pay, not just for the expansion, but you got to also remember we may have to kick in monies for these projects you're going to hear about soon. I mean, we have grants, we've got loans, we have all that, but I'll tell you, the way these bids are coming in nowadays is scary. I cannot begin to tell you how everything's getting overbid. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that before we get started. So I believe Carter is first on our list.
You want Carter to go first? Okay. All right. This is Mr. Hubbard. He is Vice President and Regional Manager of WK Dixon. And their motto is, one of it is great communities start with well-designed infrastructure. Great communities start with well-designed infrastructure. He has a BS in civil engineering from VMI and a master's in civil engineering from Villanova. So this topic is our regionalization with Brunswick County, a process that began in 2019. And this began with Hazen and Sawyer. And, you know, I learned a great deal from those engineers. And like I say, I have great respect for engineers. And they taught me about I&I, infiltration and inflow. And this is an inefficiency in our sewer system where we process approximately 134,000 gallons per day of material that's not sewer. So this inefficiency must be fixed. And also our lift stations where we have that issue. So there are multiple issues. We have the feasibility, we have the expansion, we have pipe replacement, we have a citywide sewer rehab, and we have the lift stations. And so I look forward to the discussion from Mr. Hubbard. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Aldermen, members of the public. It is my pleasure to speak to you today. I spoke to you before the fall funding round to talk through the capital improvement projects and just the list of all the things that were needed and some of those potential costs. Unfortunately, we're back here today. We're going to talk about wastewater treatment. And then Wooten is going to talk through some of the merger study that they're involved in. And so we're going to kind of go back and forth a little bit and to just prepare you for that. So I'm not going to talk the whole time. We did receive bids in November. The bids were rejected because they were over their budget. They were much more than anticipated. The previous engineer did a very good job at explaining how current prices are based on market value. And unfortunately, the market value at the time was significantly more at $47 million for the construction when the project budget was $29.8 million for the project. So that is significant. The bids were rejected. We did some investigation. We talked to some contractors. There's been review of those bids. The answers that we received were that the cost of labor and the value at the time, the market value at the time of that project is where those bids came in, which surprised everyone. There is a plan to rebid the project once the funding is determined. To do that will require an update to the bid form and repackaging the project to try to get the best pricing. We do feel like through the bidding process we have a good handle on the work that's needed. Just some of those comments, some of the utility contractors weren't bidding on the project because they were working on DOT projects, or They're just, some of these larger companies came in and couldn't find subs to do some of that work. So that really impacted the pricing. I don't have a crystal ball and can't really predict what it's going to be in the future, but I do think with all this ARPA funding, I do think it's really important to get pricing as early as you can and be first in line to get materials, to get the pricing. I do think that a lot of contractors were anticipating some of this funding availability, and that mixed in with the challenges with getting the utility work really affected the price of that project. And I understand that we're going to talk, let's see, do we continue to go through our presentations and have questions at the end?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's really all I have for the treatment plant. I know that your meeting on Wednesday, which is the next step. So Walter, you're next.
Yes. This is Mr. Walter Groves. Grew up in New York City, has a BS in Civil Engineering, Manhattan College, has 37 plus years managing infrastructure projects in the greater Wilmington area. So thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. Nice to see you all, and I wish everyone is doing well. I'm here to present on two different projects that we're working on for the city of Southport. The first is the excuse me, Merger Regionalization Feasibility Study, otherwise known as MRF, as well as the USDA-funded sewer replacement project. Just a quick firm overview. Founded in 1936, we have civil design, building systems group, geomatics practice, and a funding strategies team to bring to bear. So regarding the MRF study, the city received funding from NCDWI for the two studies, for the water and the wastewater study. And the intent of the studies is primarily to investigate a regional merged approach to water and wastewater conveyance and disposal. So in this case, the primary stakeholder is Brunswick County. Now, we've asked the county for information. They provided us with a ton of information that we have to go through now. And this is allowing us now to finally kick off the project. We've been waiting for information. Now we've received it, and now we have to go through it all. And because of its importance, the wastewater project is first in line. So some of the information that we received: record drawings for the water and wastewater infrastructure near the city, system mapping for water and sewer, recent reporting and analyses of the two systems, and regarding systems near the city, daily flows for the past 2 years, the number and types of customers, sewer rate information, and pump station runtime data. So that's the information that we're working with right now and going through. The study goals, there are 4 of them. First task is to assess the age, condition, and vulnerability of existing asset inventory. Task 2 is to develop estimated costs associated with assuming responsibility for Southport's water and sewer utilities. Third task is to conduct limited financial analyses. And the fourth task, to prepare a technical report. So with all the information that we've received, we've begun compiling the overall maps, and we are fully aware of what the city is doing to improve the wastewater system design. And we also need to confirm with the county what needs to be done on their end to take over the Southport utilities. Importantly, as these studies are very involved, we typically budget 1 year to perform them, start to finish. And this is based on the number of people involved with gathering of data and its review. Now on to the USDA project here. The project involves a replacement of approximately 18,100 linear feet of gravity sewer lines. I'm sure you're fully aware of this already. Construction or rehabilitation of 111 sewer manholes, and the installation of a new pump station to replace the existing Leonard Street pump station. So the information review began in late 2022 before we even had an engineering services agreement. We just wanted to get a jump on this. And from that information, we determined that, or it was previously determined, that the 8-inch sewer line that is currently in place is the correct size, so we'll be replacing in kind with modern material. But the sizing is fine for current and future needs. All the work will be performed within the existing streets rights-of-way and on city-owned land, and wetlands and floodplain areas will not be impacted. Regarding the Leonard Street pump station, it currently is adequate as far as the pump sizing. It's just that the pumps are old and they need to be renewed. It needs to be rebuilt. So the new station needs to go in. There's no new flow increase that is anticipated to occur. Current operating range is approximately 49,000 gallons per day on average, with peaks estimated to 76,000 gallons per day. So again, the pump station will be sized similarly, the new one. And surveying here is the most important task that we're currently involved with. The faster we get that information, the faster we can begin our work. I'm sure you've noticed spray paint all along all the manholes along Southport. Hopefully you weren't too surprised about that when that started happening. We've engaged our in-house geomatics team immediately. We got them ready to go as soon as we got the agreement. We sent our crew out, and this is back in January, and this is the single most critical part of the project schedule to date. The faster we get this information, the faster we can produce our product. Now, this is looking ahead now. These previous two tasks we're currently involved with and working through. The third preliminary design task here happens after we receive our survey information. So with that, this is just an example here, not pertaining to Southport, but the preliminary layout will be created identifying all existing conditions together with a planned schematic of the proposed pump station and gravity sewer alignments. And the submittal will also include updated opinion of probable construction costs to keep the city apprised of any cost implications or fluctuations. Now, this schedule here was part of the USDA Engineering Services Agreement. So we have 110 days starting from mid-January to complete our preliminary design phase. That includes a 10-day review for the city and 10 days for us to incorporate those review comments. Then we have 135 days for the final design phase. That's 105 days. And then again, 15 days for city review and 15 days for us to incorporate those reviews and produce the final product. So all total, 245 days, 8.2 months. That's mid-January to the end of September, approximately. Hoping for that to be faster. And I wanted to point this out here. As far as the overall project schedule, the first part's there. Part up to here is what I just spoke about. There's 140 days allotted after the permit applications go in. And based on the 140 days that have been allotted to the schedule, we would be ending the end of 2025, November 2025. So the shorter that permit process is, the more time we'll have available, or the more quickly we can end the project and get it done with construction complete. I'm just saying that based on the schedule that's currently laid out, it allows for 140 days for permit review and approval. If that's shorter, then the project timeline could shrink a bit. So according to that, when does the first shovel go in the ground? That first shovel is June 1st, 2024. Right, thank you. And again, hopefully we can move that up a bit. And it's also to work around the summer season here as well. Obviously with tourist season and all, we'll try to coordinate that to make sure there's not too much impact with that. So with that said, that is the end of it. Again, an overview this time. Next time we'll have more real information to give you as we have gone through a little bit more of the process at that time.
Thank you. Any questions, Alderman Allen? Alderman Auld? Alderman Davis? Mr. Lombardi? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very good discussion. Anyone from the public that would like to ask questions, please come up to the podium.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yeah,
We have
still have-
more.
Okay,
We have more.
all right.
Okay, so there's the merger regionalization study, there's USDA. Okay. Okay. And then we were, after we prepared that capital improvement plan in the summer, we looked at just all the grant opportunities. So there were two applications that were submitted. One was a study to look at the area beyond the USDA project to look for I&I and develop a process to do that. So that was a study that was a grant of $400,000, and then an entire project was a find and fix. So it included the study and getting a contractor engaged to rehabilitate, and that was a $9.8 million package. So the good news there is that the study was funded. The find and fix project scored very highly. It didn't receive as much grant as I think would make it worthwhile, but that's still probably part of the discussion with how you're looking at different projects. But you know, what we're working towards together is an overall project to deal with your existing system, getting it to capacity with infill and with development, also some growth and some expansion, as well as treatment. So just trying to compile all these things. The study is very helpful in getting beyond, and this is also going to be kind of hard to see, especially across the room, but the USDA project is what's in purple, kind of the area right around the waterfront and further around Howe Street and all through here. That's where some of the older vitrified clay pipe is and was identified in your asset management plan and AIA. The study is to incorporate a larger area because to find I&I, you really need to look inside the pipe. We also have smoke testing to be performed. Just because it's PVC pipe doesn't mean it's completely tight. The city has also encountered some manholes that have had some leaks in them in the past and has had this fixed. But really with this study, we'll be able to take a broader look, try to identify the areas where this water's getting into the system and has had these impacts during these severe weather events. That'll help out with managing the current system, having future capacity and future cost. So that study is, the phase of that is it's been recommended by the staff at DWI for approval. The next step there would be a letter of intent to fund, and then there's a process of back and forth with fine-tuning that budget and schedule and then starting those activities, but that's something that can be done concurrently with these other projects, and it is grant, and it'll help you identify and try to get the best value for prioritizing projects and the best value for the construction cost. The other project is the lift station rehabilitation, and that one was a funding amount of $2.8 million. We have started that project. We've done field assessment. We've done drawdown testing of the pump stations. The results I'll go through here in a minute. But the next thing that we've started is evaluating different scenarios. Again, we want to utilize the infrastructure that you have in place, look towards the future with good improvement ideas, and to use this money, but also to put the money where you're going to get your most use out of it. So I'll get into that in a second. But our schedule there is to complete the design in this year and then start construction next year. Okay, so the field testing, and the staff helped us out considerably and is still involved, was done at Park, Leonard Moore, 9th, Central, and Forest Oaks lift station. The results were that the pumps performed about as expected. Many of the pump stations have been, the suction lift pump stations have been replaced. The mechanical equipment has been replaced. There's been some fine tuning and some adjustments that we've been doing and recommending with the staff and with manufacturers' representatives to get the most out of your system. Those are just common things that you need to do. Moore Street was one that we were surprised that had less capacity than we were expecting, but we're also looking at 9th, and really Central is the most important one because it collects all the wastewater from town and sends it out. As we've been involved in this process, there's been some infill development requests on 9th Street. There's been a development on Price's Creek that is looking for flow, and then there's a development on East Moore and Ferry Road that's looking for capacity. As this is going on, DOT is still moving forward with their plans. They will be replacing the utilities in this corridor. This is along 211. Sandy Lane is up in here. Oh, it's hard to see, but up in here. So they're going to be replacing utilities in this whole area in here. And so there's been some discussion with DOT and just trying to plan all these events together. I know you're very concerned about cost. We're very concerned with cost, schedule, and coordination of all these items. So obviously we're looking at the existing conditions, having this peak capacity, looking at some of the data, and, you know, the severe weather events really are significant, and those are 5-inch rainfalls, you know, heavy rainfall events. We're identifying pump improvements, just what can be done with just pump replacement, and then what can be done with the force main improvements. Okay. This is also probably going to be really hard to see, but I guess what I'm trying to describe here is the wastewater treatment plant that was down by the marina used to receive all the flow. Prior to that, there was flow that went into the river. But after, in the 60s, there was a wastewater treatment plant that was at the end of the line and had an outlet pipe right into the intercoastal waterway with some issues with treatment and meeting permit limits. That was just a very difficult problem and hard to get an NPDES renewal. Started working on that many years ago, and the most economical way to address that problem was to put in a central pump station. Could redirect the flow. At the time, there was flowed 200,000 gallons a day sent to Southeast Brunswick Sanitary District. So that pump station was capable of sending that all the way there. But to collect all the flow, this pump station was put in place. And you can see a lot of arrows heading towards that pump station, and then one line that comes out. So there's a force main that goes up to Sandy Lane. So you have a lot of flow that is coming from all over the city and has to be repumped from Central up to Sandy Lane. And if you're looking at the system and it's just doesn't really make sense, it's because some pipes were heading in one direction and have to be rerouted, and we were collecting the wastewater and getting it out. The plans at the time were to handle that current flow with future flows from development in areas to be directed directly out of town to Sandy Lane, and you've had development requests in those areas. So what we're looking at is just first of all to maximize and make sure you're getting the most out of your existing system, and then rehabilitate and replace the critical components because of the cost of doing that. As we're looking at that, I'm pointing Leonard, which is part of the USDA project, is currently doing its design capacity. It has very low head conditions. It just comes out of here and goes right into a manhole and goes into Central. More over here is one that has a bit of an issue. Some of this development up here, all of this is going through one central location and being pumped out. What we're able to do is model those flows and look at several scenarios. One scenario is a new force main coming from this area and redirect some of this flow up here to Sandy Lane, which would allow Central to have capacity for infill development. Just all these projects going on at one time, there is going to be some coordination that's needed just to make sure that you've got your DOT encroachment agreements and just all the different permits that are required. But it's going to be a lot of different projects at once because we're trying to finish everything by 2026. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and prioritizing and can get those projects done. But really the priorities to make sure that you're getting the capacity out of your system and then the plan for the future. See if I'm leaving anything else out here. The study will also look at some of the other pump stations. There are many more pump stations that are smaller in capacity. They need to be evaluated as well. They need to be maintained. But these are the ones that really impact your system the most because they're the highest flow. And they're putting pressure on the system. And the other pump stations pump to these. So that's why these are so important and why we focused on these first. So we're involved in the scenario analysis now. We are going to provide some recommendations with that and move right into design of those improvements, of those priorities, so that we can get design completed in 2023 and have time for construction and completion in the time frame required. I'm ready for questions.
Any questions, Alderman Alt?
I do. Has the city shared with you the E. coli and other pollution things from the Three Creeks?
I have been provided some of that information. We haven't had an opportunity to go through all that information, but yes, we have been provided that.
So as you're going through all the other matrix of trying to figure out how to prioritize this, to give you an example, on the 9th Street one, where they take the sample, one of the last samples, if 230 is the cutoff between good water and bad water, it was 2,420. So there's a problem there. I don't know what the problem is. I don't know if it's our pipes. We also have samples taken at Prices Creek and Bonnets Creek as well. Those spike. One time they're virtually nothing, and the next time they're off the record, off the charts, I should say. So I don't know why that causes. I have to line that up with the weather conditions at the time to see if that's an issue. But I really would like us to concentrate. If we've got a public health issue, whatever is causing this, I don't know what it is. I had a thought at one time, but Mr. Stanley has told me that, and correctly so, that couldn't possibly be affecting the system for a full year. Like for 9th Street, sometimes it pumps raw sewage into the creek. So when it does that, as much as 9,000 gallons, there's going to be an influx in the rate. But it hasn't done that for quite some time now. And so that issue of pumping the sewage out directly is not what's causing us to have 10 times the rate that we have now. So I think it's important that we keep in mind the sewer systems around, the sewer piping around those 3 areas, and we certainly can work, Tom will certainly knows where they are, to make sure that goes into the matrix of how you prioritize, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, I do have, can I say one thing? And I just point out, Mr. Alt, that we are not the only potential source of E. coli for the creeks around here. We've got septic tanks and boats, and many other cities have wastewater empties into the Cape Fear River. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that we're not the only potential source out there.
Well, for the E. coli, that's a freshwater issue. It's a freshwater issue. It's the water coming down the creeks. It's not the brackish water. That's a different test. So if the E. coli numbers are up, septic fields are, certainly for Price's Creek, a distinct possibility. But for the water coming down the Cape Fear River, that's a different type of test for other people. So if you're taking one in the brackish water, which is Price's Creek, I believe, that very well could be that issue.
Yeah, and it'd also be 9th Street too, because you've got Robert Roark Drive, whatever, the Smithfield Woods is septic tanks. There's a lot of septic tanks back there.
Well, it very well, we're in the exploratory stage. I fully agree with you, sir.
And just to continue on that, I have an article from June 9th, 2021. Southport pilot sewage spills blamed on heavy rain. I believe you alluded to that. Mr. Hubbard, 5 inches of rain that time. I think it says nearly 6.5 inches of rain beginning early Friday, June 4th, caused 2 sanitary sewer overflows in the city. They said the spill monitored until it ended at 1 p.m. Friday. Overflow caused 9,000 gallons of untreated wastewater to spill into Cottage Creek. And then another spill was discovered, and a 10,800 gallon spill. So, and so this was reported, and if you look at the North Carolina Department of Environmental and Natural Resources General Statute 143-215.1c, that anything, you have to report a discharge over 1,000 gallons or more of untreated wastewater into the surface waters. So, we have been doing that, and this doesn't happen that often, but not many pump stations would be able to handle it. Is that correct? I mean, do you build a pump station to be able to handle that type of weather event, or is it more of an average that you can handle? But anyway, we are following the statute, and we have been reporting.
Sure. Right. Well, pump stations are generally sized to accommodate the regulatory required flow amount that they're supposed to receive. And so there's a component of that that's by bedroom or by employee or by laundromats are really bad. You don't have a whole lot of laundromats, but you have restaurants and you have different types of customers. But yes, there's a regulatory requirement that you apply to that, and part of that 120 gallons per bedroom does factor into I&I. Once your system, and really, you're tracking it and you're following the data based on your meter records, and we also look at how many runtime at each pump station. And what's significant, and as you've mentioned, these heavy rainfall events create an overwhelming condition, and we need to find those openings and fix that. And one effective way to do that is smoke testing, and so that's included in the study, and then there'll be some other types of investigation as well. But ideally, we'll find a significant amount of those and make improvements.
Any other questions, Alderman Davis? Mr. Lombardi? Mayor Pro Tem? Anyone in the public that would like to come up, please come up to the microphone.
Hi, my name is Vicki Morrison. There's 4 of us here today that, out of a total of 5 that do the river testing here. We've been doing it for several years. The worst has been 9th Street. We can actually see sewage in some of the water when we go to test there. We do salt water, brackish water, and fresh water. And we have historical data that shows that E. coli is a big problem in our water systems, not just 9th Street, which is the absolute worst, which is why I know there's probably more data I don't understand about why Leonard Street has got importance, but 9th Street is terrible. But I just want the committee to know that we're very fortunate that we have a place like Cape Fear River Watch that lets us do the testing scientifically. We take it down in an ice chest. They do it professionally. It's not a fly-by-night test. And we're volunteers. We do it every month. We've been doing it for years, and we're here today because we want y'all to know that this is the fish that we eat. It's from that. The water we swim in, that's what we're getting. It's a serious problem, and I'd like that to be taken into account when you look at the pipes. One of our leaders who couldn't be here today went into Bonnet's Creek down off Moore and looked inside that pipe. It's cracked. Our sewage pipes are in bad shape. So, I really think it's something we feel very committed. We're here to hear you today, and we'd like you to just look at our historical data and know that it's not just one spot, it's pretty pervasive. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question? Okay, thank you. Thank you. This was really an excellent discussion, excellent presentations. I think we all learned a lot today, and we have a lot of work to move forward. Any board comments? Alderman Allen, Mr. Alt, Alderman Davis, Mr. Lombardi, Mayor Pro Tem?
Just thankful for the presenters coming today and this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
And I want to thank the city manager for putting this together. So everybody at one time gets to hear how the pieces are trying to be put together, that there actually is conversation between engineers and we're moving forward. So, first thing was to figure out there was a problem, and the city did that. They did some testing to figure out different parts of the problem. We still have some more to work on that, but it's all moving in the direction that it should be moving in. Perhaps we all would like it to move faster, but it is the way of the world, and so you just have to bide your time. But the purpose of this meeting was to make sure that we're all on the same page of music, and I want to thank the engineers. Thank you very much.
Yes, yes, thank you, and thank you for everyone for being here. Like I say, my respect for engineers is unwavering, so thank you for all you do. And we don't have to get it fast, we have to get it right, and I appreciate you taking the time that's needed to get these projects done correctly. It involves science, data, and we have to follow that. It requires money, lots of money also. So thank you for your expertise. Thank you all for being here. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Second. Aye. All in favor? Okay. Unanimous. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.